Michelle, you ready?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Great. All right, with that, I will call to order the Wednesday, July 3rd, 2019 meeting of the Reno City Planning Commission. We'll begin. I'll ask everybody to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll ask Commissioner Taylor to lead us tonight. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Michelle, can we have roll call, please?
Okay. Britton Griffith is absent. Peter Gower?
Here.
Ed Hawkins?
Here.
John Marshall is absent. Paula Levis is absent. Kathleen Taylor?
Here.
Mark Johnson?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Next item on our agenda is public comment. This item is for either public comment and any action item or for any general public comment. Just a reminder for anyone who'd like to make public comment on this or any of the action items, see Michelle and fill out one of these forms. I have a request to speak from Tammy Holtstill.
Tammy Holtstill, Lemon Valley Swan Lake Recovery Committee for the record. For you, Kathleen, who I have not met yet, been doing this for 2 years, 6 months, and so many days. Been in front of the board trying to get some kind of relief for the Lemon Valley residents. Before you see on the screen right here, I have submitted for you guys to all have your own. It pretty much sums up what happened in the 2-week trial, which the residents did prevail on, which means that the city of Reno, in all of its wisdom, didn't use it properly. Now it's time for there to be a fire lit underneath the city of Reno's chairs so that we can get something done before October, which is our rainy season. You have issues. Retention, detention ponds, which I've talked about. Water coming from Silver Lake to Swan Lake. Your sewer plant, by the way, your staff that told you that they did not do a permit to NDEP, and I told you they did. Also, I just found out this last week that NDEP has denied that application for that permit for the 4 MGD. So you really have a sewer problem. How can you develop if you don't have a sewer? We already know that you've already developed to the BFE already, and look where it's gotten you. It's time for the Planning Commission to step up and say, hey, wait a minute, council, we've got a problem. Staff, we don't believe anything you're saying because we found too many errors so far, and really start questioning what is the right thing to do. How can you live with yourselves putting these residents through 2 years, 6 months, and however many days of not being in their homes or having to pay to fix their homes? It's not just the winter of all winters. It was only the 3rd largest. All of the information that I have spewed all this time is wrapped up nicely by Steve Walgast and Washoe Residents for Appropriate Planning. It's time to start working with us. We don't want to fight. We want to fight to fix. That's all I've been here to do all along, and it's time to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Michelle, do we have any additional requests to speak forms on this item?
Not for this item, thank you.
Anyone else wishing to make public comment under general public comment? Seeing none, I will close that, bring it back to the agenda. Item number 4, City Council Liaison Reports.
No reports from Councilwoman Weber. No reports today from Councilwoman Weber.
Okay, thank you. Next on our agenda is the election of officers for possible action.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Gower?
I'd like to make a motion to have yourself, Commissioner Chairman Johnson, continue as chairman of the Planning Commission.
Thank you. I have a motion.
I'll second that motion.
Motion and a second. I guess the discussion would be that's acceptable to me. So all those in favor?
Glad you
Aye.
accept.
Aye. Okay, motion carries unanimously. Next, we would be looking for a vice chair.
I'll nominate Taylor. Kathleen Taylor as the vice chair.
Okay? Have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I think we should have some discussion on that. It's I guess an interesting meeting with only a couple of us involved in the conversation. To Commissioner Taylor's credit, you've been on the Planning Commission before. It's your first meeting this evening coming back, so I want to make sure that we're, that we're okay with that. Commissioner Taylor, do you have thoughts on that? Are you ready to be vice chair of the Planning Commission?
I think I can handle it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate the nomination.
All right. I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Congratulations. I can take the next meeting off. That was the best look I've had all night. Michelle, did you need me to hold for a second?
No, I think we're okay. We'll just
Okay.
continue.
That's good because I don't want to move her to this side because then I'll actually have to look both directions
Yeah,
during
I
the rest
heard
of the
you
meeting.
say that earlier.
So this
we're
is
good.
perfect. Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to item number 6, public hearings. We'll start with item 6.1, case number LDC 19-00061, Reno Coffee Company at Wells and Vassar. We will start with a presentation from the applicant.
Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Melissa Jennings and this is Josh Kellen. We have an existing coffee shop called Reno Coffee Company at the bottom of the Arlington Towers, and we are currently moving that coffee shop to the Wells area, which is an area we're very interested in kind of bringing a little bit more daytime life to, and hopefully a little bit more nighttime as well. And the reason why we applied for the special use permit was to take our program and add beer and wine to it. And also so that we could stay open, well, till 11, which is actually okay without the special use permit. We are hoping to just bring a little bit more of a one-stop shop to the community since so many residents live there and travel to downtown to us at the Arlington Towers. We found that a lot of people say they live down there, but they haven't found something quite like what we want to present to them in that area. So we have applied for that. It's been a pretty easy process overall because it's a newer building that's been revamped recently, and there's been no questioning of sewage or traffic. We didn't have to do any studies of that sort because it was all pretty up to date. There was no sound test that was needed. One other thing that planning mentioned was really great about our building was that we have really big windows. So as far as safety goes, for us, employees, customers, and people on the outside, police enforcement passing by, it's really safe on both ends. So they like our space for that reason. What else do I want to say? And yeah, so we would like to go ahead with this special use permit to expand our program that's already doing so well at the Arlington Towers and be a part of the WANP area, as they call it. Yeah, I don't know. At the NAB meeting, they didn't have any questions. They were just really excited about it. They were like, I live right there. But do you guys have any questions for us?
So we'll let you do your presentation, then staff will do a presentation, and then we'll ask you any questions.
Okay.
So,
Okay. That's pretty much our presentation. We didn't even really go through our slides last time. They just wanted to talk to us. The lady that was running it said she lived around the corner, so we just started kind of talking away. Anyways, we'll let Kyle go, and if you guys have questions, we'll talk to you.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Kyle, your turn. Try to be as nice as they were.
No guarantees, Chairman. Good evening, Chairman Johnson, Commissioners, Kyle Chisholm, Assistant Planner for the record. I have a brief PowerPoint. So as the applicant stated, they're requesting a bar use in the community commercial zoning district. It requires a special use permit. Specifically, this location's in the Wells Avenue neighborhood plan overlay. There's a 10,000-foot view of the site located on the corner of Vassar and Wells. The red indicates the zoning. It's community commercial, as I mentioned. Staff really didn't have a lot of issues with this request. We were able to make all the findings. The NAB was Ward 3 NAB was generally supportive of the request, and we were able to make all the findings and recommend the Planning Commission approve the project. And I'm here if you have any more questions.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. That was pretty nice. Thanks. Okay, before I open this up for public comment, I'll bring it back to the commission for disclosures. Commissioner Gower?
Commissioner Gower visited the site.
Mr. Hawkins visited the site.
Commissioner Taylor visited the site.
Commissioner Johnson, as did I. Michelle, do we have any request to speak forms on this item?
Not for this item.
Is there anyone in the audience wishing to make public comment on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions. Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kyle, are there any requirements for parking for this facility?
Kyle Chisholm, Assistant Planner for the record. No, there is no parking for a bar or restaurant use in this zoning district. I believe it was 2 years ago, the council adopted an amendment, text amendment, that I guess effectively did not require parking for bar, restaurant, and retail uses in this zoning district. So no.
Then, since they're going for an SUP, is there any of the landscaping that needs to be upgraded?
No, it's an existing site. There's no expansion of the existing building that would require any additional landscaping.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Additional questions? Discussion items? Or motion? Commissioner Taylor.
I'd like to make a motion based on compliance with the applicable findings. I move to approve the special use permit subject to the following conditions. Specifically, I can make all the findings, finding A, that's compatible with existing surrounding land uses and development, and the project is in substantial conformance with the master plan, findings A and B.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have a motion. Commissioner Hawkins.
Mr. Hawkins, I'll second that. I can make all the findings.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Good luck with your project.
Thank you, guys. Happy 4th.
Okay. Next item on our agenda, item 6.2, case number LDC 19-00063, Ryland Apartments. Once again, we'll start with a presentation from the applicant.
Good evening. For the record, Dave Snellgrove, Planning and Right-of-Way Manager with CFA. It's a really fun project for me to work on. I'm very passionate about more housing, more affordable level housing in our downtown core and intensity in our core. My daughter lives up in Boise, and they have a really fantastic downtown scene. There's so many people on the street. A lot of it is because they have housing and some energy down there. I would love to see that in Reno. With me tonight are Fred and Dee Dee Desiderio, who are with property owners, and also Mr. Jeff Frame, who's the project architect, who put together this really cool architecture that I'll be going through. This is a special use permit for height. We're requesting that the height be allowed to go from 45 feet, which is identified as the maximum within the downtown regional center, California district. We're proposing up to 63 feet. One thing I want to point out right when we get started on this, this isn't a variance request. The downtown Reno Regional Center and some other areas of town identify that heights are anticipated to go higher, so they gave a little bit different process and a little bit easier process than having to make hardship findings for a variance. So this is just a special use permit for height. We could build a 45-foot tall structure and go straight to building permit with this, with the way that that the code is set up. So the property location sits between, it's north of Ryland Avenue and east of Park Street and west of High Street. I might have those backwards. I think I do. East of High and west of Park. We do not take up the whole block. There are 3 parcels to the north. In your staff report, there's a handwritten letter in the back from the nearest property owner who's, where the little cut is, he's the closest property there off of High Street. And I will go through some of the things that we have done to try and address his concerns. Locationally, we are right across the street. We're due east of the Bosma Business Center, which has been in existence. I was really quite surprised to find that was built in 1981. I know it's been there ever since I moved to town, but I didn't realize that it was back as far as 1981. And then right across the street from us is another office that was built in 1986. I point those out because both of those are in excess of the 45-foot height as well. One I believe is 52 and one is 47 or 48 feet in height. So this is the subject property. The white area in that is alleyways that have never been developed out really fully as roadways. They're gravelled, they're passable, but we will be coming forward, and it's conditioned that we come forward with an abandonment after the fact, and we didn't want to go forward with an abandonment not knowing whether we have an approved project. So we would be following up with an abandonment to those alleyways if this project gains approval. The properties within the downtown mixed-use area in the master plan, as I mentioned, is in the DRRC California Avenue District. That district identifies the Reno downtown, the DRRC identifies it's the highest density and intensity area in northern Nevada, and we are part of that. It's concentrated development and pedestrian safety enhancements are encouraged. Those are on pages 2 and 3 of the Downtown Reno Regional Center Plan. Within the California district, we've got our property highlighted in yellow there. And I want to point out DRRC Policy 5 identifies a minimum density of 21 dwelling units per acre, and we have definitely exceeded that in our application. There are many other policies in DRRC that directly are applicable with our project and are that we are definitely meeting. And there were some others I could add in, but I kind of ran out of space on this page. But you've got one of them that I think is really interesting and I really like relative to the great job that Jeff did on the architecture. Number 8, provide a variety of building heights and forms to create visual interest. I think as you look at the architecture, if you haven't dug into it much in your staff report as we go through it, you'll see that there's a lot of horizontal and vertical articulation with this. It's a very positive project. We have a strong multimodal connection. Parking is located inside a structure and so on. This is just the zoning. The zoning reiterates the 21 dwelling units per acre is conformant with the master plan. This is really a graphic that shows you the live, work, play aspect that we always hear about in this project, and this product is identified in a location that is really positive for your work element. You've got 3 major employment hubs: Renown, the downtown entertainment casino district, another major employer, and then you also have the financial district. These are all basically within a half-mile walking distance of the site. You've got entertainment, and this definitely doesn't cover everything with entertainment, but I highlighted the Midtown area and Aces Ballpark. And then you've got your recreation and your play. Wingfield Park is just a touch outside for the amphitheater, but you've got Stewart Park, you've got Pickett Park, and this doesn't even include the Riverwalk Trail, which you can get on. And those are all within a half a mile. As far as connectivity with RTC transit stops, within 1/4 mile, there's 8 RTC lines that you can connect to. Within just over a half mile, you're at RTC City Center. So you really don't have to own a car if you don't want to in this type of location. And that's one of the things that we're kind of counting on and relying on, that people are going to start to be walking on the streets, and we'll get a little bit more of that activity that I would love to see as a planner and urban planner. Getting to the architecture, we're requesting a change to exceed the 45-foot height identification in the code and allow us to go up to 63 feet at our max. The whole building is not 63 feet. This elevation that you're looking at here is the south elevation, which would be viewed from Ryland. This is the tallest consistent elevation that you'll see. The other sides of it, the building steps down. But you can see even from this elevation, there's lots of break to the top of the building. You're getting a lot of articulation. You're also getting articulation with the balconies and some of the treatments that Jeff has incorporated into the design. This is a two-building structure, one on either side of what used to be the alleyway on the south and is the alleyway. That is going to provide your through access, your fire access, your trash access, and so on. We had to keep that clear above. We probably could have put a bridge, but we've gone ahead and left that open, so it is two separate buildings. This is the west elevation. This one's really important because the letter that you got in the in the staff report from Mr. Shields, and I have had 2 meetings with him. We've talked over some things, tried to incorporate many of the things that he was asking for. Some of them we weren't able to, and others we definitely were. I want to point out in the design of the building, we go from 63 feet and the building steps down as you get closer to the north. The house is on the farthest north side. We actually go down to a 3-story building there, and the closest element to him is 42.5 feet. It's not at 45, it's actually under 45 feet. This is on Park Street, so on the east side of the property. The project does the same thing, and you can see how the building steps down and has nice articulation. So when you're looking at it and you're driving in on Wells Avenue or Ryland and you look over, I think this is going to present a very nice feature in the skyline. I think it presents a great product and a needed product from a housing and a more affordable housing realm. These will be apartments that will be in the mid-market range, I would say. Locating, I had mentioned Boston Business Center's at 52 feet. The office building at 500 Ryland across the street from us is 47 feet. These are not up to 63, I understand, but these were developed 35 to 40 years ago. And at that time, these were appropriate and acceptable. And I know the Boston Business Center gets a ton of use. I've been in there many times, and it's a very nice building. If you think back to the generation and how Reno's grown, the Hotel Cortez was the tallest building in town at one point. And at one point, the Mapes was. So over time, we've gone more vertical. In fact, there was just an article in the paper of some new things coming about that eventually will probably make it to this table. These are great things. I'm really excited for this stuff going on in our town. So I think that in fitting in with the surroundings, I think that we're close to there, keeping in mind, these were 35 to 40 years ago. We're now 35 to 40 years later, and we're asking for 63 feet. If you wait for the master plan to change 10 to 15 years from now, odds are this area is probably going to have a height limitation of 55 to 65 feet. So the 63 feet, it probably isn't out of the question and where we should be going as a community. This image here just takes our building in a 3D view and puts it into the site. So contextually, I think that this fits very, very well within the area that it's situated. And this is a view back more towards the northwest, which puts downtown Reno in your background. We were asked as part of this when we went in for a staff applicant meeting to prepare a shadow study. And with that, Jeff's office did put together that study. The line that you see coming down the diagonal is the line of the winter sun path. Now, we have to do this at December 21st, shortest day of the year, and we also have to do it at June 21st, longest day of the year. So we have run that in both scenarios. So in the December study, we look at it at 11, noon, and 1 p.m. If you look at a 45-foot tall building versus the building that we have, look at the shadow line on top of the nearest neighboring roof, and it's virtually identical. I can argue that we're actually a little bit better. If you look at noon, we've got a little bit less shadow than what we would be if we were at a 45-foot building. Another very relevant point I want to bring up here is there's a really large tree, which was mentioned in Mr. Shields' letter, and that tree is 65 feet tall. And when you go, if you went later in the day, you're starting to get shadowing on the front of the house at 1 p.m. And as you move through the day, if you go to 2, 3, or 4, and we don't have those images, but what you're going to be getting shadow from during the warmest parts of the day is from that tree, not as much from the building that we're proposing. So during the summer, there's actually no effect at all. There really isn't a shadowing difference in the slightest. So what we've done, and I saw that Mr. Shields showed up, so I'm happy that he's here. Some of the things that we didn't have in this, you see the landscape area. There's a landscape buffer. It's 10 feet down near where his residence is, and we've got the 3 trees planted there. He wanted to save the roots of those trees, and we understood that, and we tried to do what we could to make sure that we disrupted those as minimally as possible. So we added a landscape buffer in there. That's not only going to help protect some of the roots, but it'll also end up creating a little bit more separation. We have a solid masonry wall there, as we do on the northeastern property line. So this shows the distances. Our setback requirements and distances are much lower than what we have from our building, where it's at the ground floor, which is the shaded green area off to the left-hand side of the graphic. We're actually a little over 40 feet from our building to his house, which is a fairly significant distance, especially when you're talking about the urban area. And then we do have a building pop-out, and that's kind of the dashed jagged line that goes in and out and heads to the right. Where that jets out and where that gets the closest, his home
Dave, can you
stops about there.
use the mouse
Oh,
to show that
you know
on
what?
the screen?
That's a dandy idea. Let's see.
Thank you.
There we go. Okay, this portion here, the end of Mr. Shields' house is about where the pop-out starts, and that is 26.5 feet away. So we're in excess of any minimum requirements here, and we have the landscape buffer and the sound wall and solid concrete wall as well. So presentation policy code summary, I'll go through this really quick. Conforms with the master plan and zoning. We can construct a 45-foot building on site. I don't think that that's positive for the city. I think what's been designed here is a really fabulous project. This is within walking distance of 3 major areas. It's that live, play, work concept and idea. Very well connected to the RTC bus network. And the project provides the desired densities referenced in downtown Reno Regional Center Policy 7. This represents planning for the future of the city and going to some of these higher densities. I know sometimes it can be challenging when you've got some existing growth there and you're proposing something that's bigger, but really in 10 to 20 years from now, this won't seem bigger. Maybe even in 5 years from now. The project provides both vertical and horizontal articulation, which identifies what I brought up in DRRC Policy 8, that visual interest. I think it's been done very, very well and should be supported. So I'll go ahead and leave the findings. I'm getting a little bit shorter on time. I'll leave most of the findings if you have any questions on them. But these buildings have been designed in a step fashion if it's compatible with the existing surrounding uses. The way that we've stepped these, we've gone down to basically a 3-story element closest to the existing, and I know that Mr. Shields has lived in the house since the 70s, and I believe the house was built prior to that. So this house has been around for a long time. We're on to kind of a different development pattern now, but I think we have done things to not only set the building back farther than is required, but also we've taken it down to a lower level. And finding E is one that might raise a question. The proposed location, scale, intensity, density, height, layout, setback, and architecture of the overall design of the development and use as proposed is appropriate for the area in which it's located. I'll point to the Truckee Meadows Regional Plan. It goes over and over and over again in talking about intensification of the urban cores, the transit-oriented development corridors, and so on. We are definitely, being in the DRRC, we are definitely in the urban core area. So I believe that what we're proposing is very well appropriate for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. The 1981 and 1986 buildings that are nearby us are a little bit higher than what the code would typically allow. We're looking at going I think 11 feet higher than the highest element on the Bosma Business Center. I think the layout works well. We've got the parking underneath, which is what part of the DRRC goals. And one other one, strict application of this would constrain the design. We're looking for intensity. I'm hopeful that this is where we're going as a community, especially in these core areas. So I think that it's appropriate to start to bring some things up, especially when you're in the downtown core. With that, I will close my presentation, made it by not necessarily there, my chinny chin chin, and I'll be available for any questions.
Thank you, Dave. We'll get presentations from staff and call you back with questions. Heather, good evening.
Good evening, Chair Johnson and Planning Commissioners. Welcome, Commissioner Taylor. Heather Manzo, Associate Planner for the record. The applicant did a great job of illustrating what their proposal is before you this evening and some of the elements that they've incorporated into their design to really ensure the compatibility with surrounding neighbors. And so staff is recommending approval of this request. I did want to note that this is within an area that does have readily available transit services to it. The applicant has proposed parking within the building floor plan. And as you've noted in your staff report, this request is contingent upon an additional action by City Council for the abandonment. So typically the applicant really has brought forward to you the request for their development plans prior to moving forward to City Council for the abandonment request. And so there are some conditions related to this request that are generally related to what we would see with an abandonment, which is the dedication of easements and access. The applicant has provided between the two buildings a north-south future connection should an abandonment be approved that would dedicate for access from the Ryland to the block to the north. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Heather. Before I open up public comment, I will bring it back to the commission for disclosures. Again, start with Commissioner Gower.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I visited the site.
Commissioner Hawkins visited the site.
Commissioner Taylor, I visited the site and had a discussion with the applicant.
Commissioner Johnson visited the site, spoke with the applicant's representative, and received voicemail. So with that, Michelle, do we have any requests to speak forms on this item?
No, we do not.
Is there anyone in the audience wishing to make public comment on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions. Commissioner Gower.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heather, we have a finding, just trying to pull it up here, apologize. Finding related to window placement, and it's my understanding, looking through the staff report, that there would be windows on that north elevation. Can you walk me through what the potential concerns would be with that finding relative to those windows on that north elevation and the residents to the north there?
Is it okay if I turn that over to the applicant to address the north elevation? Did you have that in your presentation? Just one moment while we find that sheet. Thank you.
Sure.
I think I've got it in the findings. One of the things that we've done on that north side, there is the 65-foot tree, which has a double purpose. It can serve as some shadowing and shading, and does on Mr. Shields' property already. And it also provides some screen. There's also additional vegetation that's on Mr. Shields' property. Not as dense, obviously, as the 65-foot tall evergreen, but there is some additional vegetation there. And also we're providing additional vegetation, which will grow up and help block some of that. Now, I know from a 3-story elevation, you can have some views at different angles, but between the wall, which blocks the lower end, and vegetation, which will grow up, and we can plant those in more columnar that would be taller growing type vegetation to help screen off some of that. I think that's one way that we can handle it. I don't think that there's a big issue with it, but I would say that there's probably some concern or question that I think we can address through more columnar densely planted vegetation to help in screening. Yes. Oh, there we go. That's the north elevations there that are darkened in. They were on the shadowy side. So we do have have balconies that come out from the ground floor. And then you'd have some views down this one on the right, that would be adjacent to Mr. Shields' property, and that's where we have the 10-foot landscape area, which we can do more intense planting that will grow taller over time. And then we have, from a lower level screening standpoint, we've got the solid masonry wall.
And I guess in terms of a follow-up question and that privacy issue and the landscaping, I mean, there's part of me that wants to talk about having, more evergreen vegetation in there versus deciduous.
Yeah, I would definitely consider that.
At the same time, we're looking at shadowing issues, so I don't want to promote a situation where we're going to put these tall trees in there and they're not going to have any solar gain during the wintertime when they want it the most, when the sun angle's lowest. So that's kind of the concern there with that, the shadowing plus the privacy issue, and how do we reconcile that?
Where they'd be placed, you might get marginally more shadowing because the angle that it comes over. Can you go back to the presentation? I'll show the angle line again. Find the right one. I think it's right there. Okay. So we're breaking over the crest of our buildings at 42.5 feet, and then we've got a 10-foot planter area that's
use your
in
mouse?
kind of where the front of the
You got the mouse again.
Porsche is now. Oops. Thank you. This area here would end up being planted, so the trees would have to get pretty tall to have any additional shadow. We'd have a better result getting a tree up into, the 20, 25 foot long. And I wouldn't say it's almost more of like the juniper column, or not being a landscape architect, I'm not sure what the variety is, but something that would be a little bit more columnar and grow vertically, and then plant them more densely. We'd have to get really above the 40 plus or minus foot height before we'd start affecting additional shadowing on it, which would be pretty tall for some of those. So I'm sure that consulting with a good landscape architect would give us a species and varieties that can accomplish what we're looking for.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Additional questions? Commissioner Taylor?
Thank you. My question is regarding the height of the building. And maybe this is a question for the architect too. What happens to the design of the building if you take it down to the 45-foot level?
For the record, Jeff Frame, architect. If we take it down to the 45-foot level, it gets obviously gets shorter. We have a little bit more work to do with articulation. We probably lose about 15% of the units, so we lose density. And if we take it down to the 45-foot height level, we're not here. We don't need a special use permit.
Thank you. My other question is for staff, please. In trying to make one of the findings on finding C, it sounds like this might be a standard language thing that isn't there, but I was just needing some clarification. Therefore, the fire department is concerned with the ability to provide adequate long-term citywide services as new growth occurs. Could you kind of help me understand that just a little bit, please?
Sure, Heather Manzo, Associate Planner. And as it pertains to this request, this isn't an area that has a fully manned fire station and a couple of them within the response time that meets our goals for the city. And so as it pertains to this request, you're right, it is language that is provided by the fire department for pretty much every development proposal. In this case, I would say that it's really not a concern at this point because we do have a station 2 minutes away in the downtown area.
Thank you. I have one more quick question. For finding, bear with me here, E, it specifically talks about the density and height. In your analysis, for this, it doesn't mention the height at all in this finding. However, I do feel like it was addressed under finding A, just to get your concurrence on that.
Yes,
Would be
that's-
helpful, please.
That's correct. I do believe finding A did really elaborate the request for the additional height and how it's designed to be compatible with the surrounding area. And then under finding E, it really is just an acknowledgement that this request appeared to meet that finding.
Thank you. And then also, I did want to add that I talked to Bob Shields, too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Additional questions? I've got one for Heather, if you would, please. And maybe this is just a clarification on my part. Going back to the discussion under E, there's talk about the number of parking spaces and on-street parking provided adjacent to the subject property, but there's not really a comment about what the required parking is. There's no analysis one way or the other. So I just wanted to understand if this was a reduction, if this was in keeping with what was required. If there aren't standards for this, there wasn't a breakdown included in the staff report on that.
Sure, I'd be happy to address that. So because this is within the California Avenue district of the downtown Reno Regional Center, it actually offers up a lot of flexibility to a developer to provide parking as they determine necessary. And so RMC, Reno Municipal Code, in the parking section for downtown establishes maximum parking provisions for those areas that are up to that code standard. But the California Avenue District does allow flexibility all the way down to 0 if a developer chose to do so. In this case, they've incorporated really quite a bit of vehicle parking as well as bicycle parking into the project.
Okay, and staff is comfortable with the number of spaces that are being provided with respect to the number of units that are proposed?
Due to its location and availability of bike parking and the transit services directly adjacent to the site, yes, we are.
Was there any thought under those circumstances of asking for less parking and more landscape?
I'm sorry.
I'm just
I don't have
asking,
an
I'm
answer for
posing a
that.
question that would be asked by somebody who's probably not here. If there's a lot of reduction available on the site, are we overparked?
To answer that question, so the applicant did a pretty decent job of providing landscaping along the street frontages of the property. And in this case, their building footprint really is what houses their proposed parking. And so with the design, I do think that the parking is well hidden and provides for that option to provide parking to the residents while still meeting the landscape requirements along the frontages.
Okay. Thank you. Any additional questions, commissioners? Discussion items. Commissioner Gower.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the questions and the answers, and I want to say too that I think this is exactly the kind of project that we do need in our urban area, urban core areas. High density access by transit and walkable. I do obviously have some concerns about the shadowing and the privacy issues on the north side there, and would potentially be interested in a condition that provides a little bit more of a augmentation requirement of the landscaping on that side. And I do also share what Chairman Johnson mentioned regarding the parking and question whether we are overparked, and if we are there opportunities to increase the shade component or the landscaping kind of on that interior area instead of having that substantial amount of parking. So just wanted to voice those concerns. Otherwise, I think it's a fantastic project and a great location.
Thank you, Commissioner. Additional discussion items? I guess I wanted to follow up on I appreciate you asking the questions about the window placement, and that was actually part of one of the things that I had looked at on this. In the development of the site, in looking at this, there's actually more distance directly adjacent to the project. The building is set back a little bit further, and in the north elevation that was shown, there's actually a limited number of windows on the north elevation directly adjacent to the property. So where we're looking at the 3-story section, it's more of an oblique angle towards the site. So in looking at that finding, I had the same concerns, but then when I looked at the distance back that the windows were immediately adjacent to the project, even the existing landscaping that was there, and I do appreciate the desire to provide more landscaping, and we can have a conversation about that with respect to screening, but I think architecturally, the project has reduced the windows on that spot and pushed the building further away from the adjacent parcel. To the project itself, I agree. I think this is what we're looking for, and I certainly understand the concerns of coming in with essentially a larger multifamily project immediately adjacent to single-family residential. There's some there now, but it's not nearly this large. But I think in the applicant's response, that the area where this project abuts that is essentially allowed by right. The reason we're here, and I think as part of the presentation, was for height that's further away from that and on the street frontage. So while it is a special use permit, the findings that are required to be made for the special use permit because of the orientation of the building, I find myself able to make those because if this were just a straight 45-foot tall project, 3 floors across there, we wouldn't be seeing it. And I think we would be losing some potential density that we're looking for. So those are my comments. If there's no additional discussion, I'm certainly willing to entertain a motion on this.
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to make a motion.
Commissioner Gower?
In the case of LDC 19-00063 Ryland Apartments, based upon compliance with the applicable findings and your explanation of the architecture relative to the finding G and the privacy issue, I thought that was well articulated. I move to approve the special use permit subject to the conditions, and I can make all of the findings.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have a motion.
Mr. Hawkins, second. I can make all the findings.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Good luck with your project.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda, item number 6.3, case number LDC 19-00062, Vassar Street zone change. Start with a presentation from the applicant.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Johnson and members of the commission. For the record, Angela Foos, Planning Manager with Loomis & Associates, here today on behalf of the applicant. The project before you today is a request for a zone change. We actually have 2 zonings, and we are requesting to change those to 1 zoning. We have 2 different parcels. These 2 parcels are located at the corner of Terminal and Vassar Street. The first parcel is the larger parcel. It's comprised of about 3 acres. It does have an existing building that's been there since the 60s. It's about 100,000 square feet in size. That parcel, the larger of the 2, is currently zoned IB. The second parcel is the smaller parcel, and that is directly on the corner of Terminal and Vassar. It's currently zoned mixed use within the Mill Street Todd. That is a parking lot. So we are requesting to change those 2 parcels to IC. Here are some photos to show you the existing development. Again, the larger parcel has a built-out development. It's already developed with a building and parking and landscaping. The smaller parcel is just a parking lot. Here's a before and after of this request. The larger parcel, like I said, is currently zoned IB, and it's surrounded by really a mix of mixed use and different industrial designations. Both IB and IC surround it on 3 sides, and then the mixed use surrounds it on the east side. And the smaller parcel has that mixed use zoning and is again surrounded by a mix of IC, IB. It appears that before that mixed use zoning was in place, that smaller parcel was zoned IB. So we're asking to convert both of those to IC. Here's a map that shows the Reimagine Reno designation. All of this area has that mixed employment, and that's that new designation that we didn't have before, and really provides for a mix of different types of industrial. You can go straight industrial, industrial business, industrial commercial, so we comply with the master plan on that level. some interesting things about that mixed-use Mill Street Todd. You can do development with two different options. And again, all of these TODs that we have in the city have different design standards, different regulations. This one in particular was designed because it's in an industrial area. And so taking that into consideration, this area can be developed as either mixed use, meaning higher densities, broader mix of uses, commercial, retail, residential uses, or you can develop it with IC zoning. If you choose to develop it with IC zoning, you have to comply with all of the IC zoning standards and all of the IC zoning uses. So that's just kind of an interesting fact to say that while it's currently zoned mixed use, within that Mill Street Todd, you have two options to develop this site. So what we're asking for really is in compliance with that current zoning. Because we have two parcels, they are owned by one owner. It makes more sense to, as I would say, kind of clean this up from the owner's perspective. Moving forward, they don't have plans for development. But in order to develop it with a consistent use, they wanted to have one type of zoning. So that's part of the reason this request is coming before you. One other piece of information that I thought was useful as we're moving forward with the Title 18 update, one of the, I would say maybe recommendations coming forth is possibly to eliminate that IB zoning. And so if that is to happen at some future time, the IB zoning, which again, one of those parcels is currently designated as IB, would go away. So, and looking forward, I just want to keep that in the back of your mind. It's not up for discussion today, but I think it's worth noting that that discussion is happening on the broader sense. So what we're asking for is really in compliance with the mixed-use TOD, that Mill Street TOD, and also within the surrounding zoning and future zoning potentially of this site. And that concludes my presentation. I'll be available for questions.
Thank you, Angela. We'll hear from staff and call you back. Kyle, welcome back.
Thank you, Chair Johnson, Commissioners. Kyle Chisholm, Assistant Planner for the record. So Angela gave a very good overview of the request. I'm just gonna kind of scroll through some of these slides. Essentially, what the request is in compliance with and in conformance with the new master plan designation, which is mixed employment. Under that designation, under the purpose statement, it calls for cohesive employment areas. What the applicant is requesting to do with this zoning is conforming to that, basically creating essentially more consistency within that area. And I guess just the main highlight would be that, as Angela stated, the current Mill Street TOD already allows IC development and uses. So really, it's really on that parcel, it's really not a change. And as she stated, the Title 18 process right now, there's been feedback about getting rid of IB. So the IB zoning on the other parcel may not be there in the future, depending on what happens, but that's and the IC zoning is all surrounding that parcel right now. Is consistent with the area. The uses that would be allowed in the IC zoning is consistent with the area. And so staff was able to make all the applicable findings. The Ward 3 NAB did not have any comments on this project. And so that being said, staff recommends approving the project, and I'm here for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Kyle. Before I open up for public comment once again, I'll ask the commissioners for disclosures. Commissioner Gower, I get to start with you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I spoke with the applicant's representative and am familiar with the site.
Commissioner Hawkins, as did I.
Commissioner Taylor, I visited the site.
Mr. Johnson, I spoke with the applicant's representative, and I'm familiar with the site. Michelle, do we have any request to speak forms on this item?
No, we do not.
Is there anyone wishing to make public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions. Commissioner Taylor.
I have one quick question, Kyle. On the area description, west of the site, there's a Showerhead retail shop. When I was out there, it looks like a Head Start facility, a childcare facility is out there now. I don't know if that was something that changed, but was that service there when you went out or when you made the findings? And would it change any of your recommendations?
Question. Just for the record, I'm kind of filling in tonight. For this was Anne Marie's Lane staff report, and I'm filling in for her. So I don't have that information readily available. I did not visit the site, so I am not sure the answer to that question. What I can say is that industrial or child care centers are allowed in industrial business or IB, so it would be an allowed use there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. We appreciate your honesty on that one. That was way to own it there at the mic. That was good. Commissioners, additional questions? Discussion or a motion?
Mr. Hawkins, I'll motion to, in the case number LDC 19-00062 Vassar Street zone change, based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to recommend that City Council approve the zoning map amendment by ordinance, and I can make all the findings.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have a motion.
Commissioner Taylor, I second the motion. I can make all the findings.
Thank you, Commissioners. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Good luck at City Council. Okay, next item on our agenda, item 6.4, case number LDC 19-00067, the Villas 2 at Keystone Canyon. We'll start with a presentation from the applicant.
This down. Good evening. I'm Karen Downs with Manhart Consulting, Chair Johnson and Commissioners. I'm here representing the applicant for the Villas 2 at Keystone Canyon, tentative map and special use permit. Let's see. Oops. Where are they?
Just use the down arrows
use
to,
arrows there.
yeah,
Thank
there you go.
Yeah, we make everybody use the mouse as a pointer, but the arrows do everything else.
I got that. I am clear on the pointer part. It's a 10.9 acre portion of the Keystone Canyon PUD, which is at McCarran and Leadership Parkway. It has, these slides are to show you the existing master plan and zoning designations. It's got a SPA master plan and its zone PUD for the Keystone Canyon PUD. Our request tonight is for a tentative map that will create a subdivision of condo units, single-family attached, for 115 units and 47 garage space parcels on this 10.9 acre portion of the site. It's in conformance with the Keystone Canyon PUD. The special use permit is for hillside development and cuts and fills. The special use permit is for the Keystone Canyon PUD, that it's in conformance with that SUP that was approved with the PUD. The original approval was in 1999 on the special use permit. So here's our conceptual site plan for the project. You'll see as we talked about before, the total site is 10.9 acres. There's 115 one and two bedroom units in 10 buildings, 10 residential buildings. In accordance with the PUD, there is no maximum density, but throughout the entire PUD site, there's a maximum number of units of 745. We'll talk more about that later, but this is below that 745 units. The density as proposed here is 10.55 units per acre. There is a parking requirement of 237 spaces, and we exceed that, including the garage parcels that we talked about earlier, and also guest parking spaces. The site includes, it's 6.6 acres on this particular portion of the site. Additionally, there's open space around the site that was part of the Keystone Canyon PUD. So if you take, I would call it its fair share of open space, From the Keystone Canyon PUD, the total open space for this project is 11.17 acres. So here's the land use plan for the PUD that is approved. So as you'll see, this is implementing this, using the mouse as a pointer, implementing this mixed use portion of the site here. It's phase 3 of the Keystone Canyon PUD. The existing villas, apartments are here built on site. Over here is the overlook at Keystone Canyon portion of the project that was approved, I believe it was in 2017. And then this would be phase 3 of the project, Villas 2. And as you'll see, as we got into the design of the site, it takes in, we're calling it an adjusted boundary, but it adjusted the boundaries to protect this trailhead over here. And it's the original mixed use boundary is 10.9 acres. The proposed is 10.9 acres. So there's no change to the mixed use polygon or the open space available. All right. For the total number of PUD units, we did an analysis that just shows the 745 units that are permitted through the Keystone Canyon PUD. What is there existing, the number approved. So the total number of approved units is 560, which leaves 185 units allowed. And what we're proposing is 115. So that totals 675 units, which is 70 units fewer than what's allowed. Here's the conceptual elevations on the product. You'll see there are 2 different building types. This is building 1. It has 7 2-bedroom units, 4 1-bedroom units, and 6 garage spaces underneath. You'll see there's hillside adaptive architecture that will reduce the site disturbance. This is building 2. It has 10 2-bedroom units, 2 1-bedroom units, and 3 garage spaces. All right. This is the trails plan for the site. It is small. You'll have a hard time reading it. The next slide, it'll have a better blow up of the site so you can see it. But I did want to point out here a couple of questions that came up at the NAB meeting. One is on cultural resources. You'll see up in past where you can't see, there are some cultural resources. Back at the time when the PUD was developed, there was conversations with the Reno Sparks Indian Colony, and it was agreed at that time to make sure that the project would prevent any unauthorized access to the site. You'll see with this trail plan that it is going to restore some of these trails that are already there to prevent unauthorized access. Also with fire access, there'll be access right in here through the trails plan for emergency access that will be gated. And then over here on the west side of the project, there's also emergency gated access here for fire. So here's that blow up portion. You can see the existing, if you call them trails, but the existing access paths through the site that would be revegetated. Here is the existing trailhead that's there. And the proposed trailhead over here that's not a part of the project site itself, but is on the parcel and is part of the trails plan, would be constructed with this portion. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. We'll get the presentation from staff and call you back with questions. Heather, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Heather Manzo, Associate Planner for the record. So Mrs. Downs went over the request that's before you this evening. as far as the request for the 115 single-family attached residential units and their associated garages. This is a unique product that we haven't really seen in the city of Reno, where there are a limited number of garage spaces that are being proposed that are in association with meeting the parking requirements. And so you may have noticed condition number 6 of the staff report does outline a condition that requires that those garages and the spaces in front of them be dedicated to a single unit and that they be utilized for parking for only one unit. The applicant did note that they were in support of all of the conditions that are recommended before them this evening on this request. And then in addition to the staff report conditions, there is the Plan Unit Development Handbook, Exhibit B of the handbook, which is Exhibit A of your staff report, that outlines a number of conditions that were approved with the original Plan Unit Development project. Those are required to any project is required to show compliance with those conditions as well. And so we have recommended that at the time development's proposed that they demonstrate compliance with those conditions. And then with the trail network, the applicant's representative did discuss kind of, if you visit the site, you'll notice that there are a lot of dirt roads that have been cut with unauthorized vehicle access over the years. And so this is something that was discussed with the Overlook project to the west as well. With development coming forward in this area, having the developed character will help to eliminate some of those unauthorized access points. In addition to that, the applicant has proposed as a part of their trail plan to go and restore and make access less desirable for vehicles to go in areas that are unauthorized. Staff is recommending approval of the request. I do believe the Planning Commission was forwarded an email from one of the Trails representatives in support of the project. This is something that through a previous application, the applicant had conducted some outreach to the Trails folks to make sure the request was consistent with what they would like to see with the area. So staff is recommending approval of this request, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Once again, before public comment, I'll ask commissioners for disclosures. Commissioner Gower?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I visited the site, spoke briefly to the applicant's representative, and received and read the email.
Commissioner Hawkins, as did I.
Commissioner Taylor, as did I.
Commissioner Johnson previously visited the site, received and read the email, and received a voicemail from the applicant's representative. Michelle, do we have any requests to speak forms on this item?
No, we do not.
Is anyone wishing to make public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions. Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question's for the applicant's representative. The reduction in homes to be built on there, what's going to be, how's it going to be utilized, the land that's left over? That's not, is it because it's not buildable or?
Just on this site, there was, the land that's left over, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Well, you said originally is, what, 170 homes, now you're going to kick it down to 117?
It's 115. There's
115.
185 left through the
Okay.
total project area that could be developed. There's no more area to develop these homes. This would be the last of the units that could be developed.
Is that property still going to be utilized somewhere in the development, or is it going to go into open space? What's going?
The remaining parcel that could be developed is for commercial use, not residential.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Additional questions? Commissioner Gower.
Mr. Chairman, a couple questions. Heather, I guess the first question for you, relative to a comment that we received from the NAB, from Randall Sharp regarding the access, emergency access, and if I understand it right, his concern was related to emergency access to the west, and I think that's being addressed, correct, with the connectivity to the adjacent development on the other end of Leadership?
And so you're referring to the one at the end of the roundabout there, or cul-de-sac. Yes, so when Overlook came forward a couple of years ago, they were conditioned to establish the emergency access only that borders that development.
So I think we addressed that concern. My concern and you talk about it in the staff report, under your discussion or finding F, about streets and highways in conformance with the master plan. We've looked at this before in that intersection there of Leadership and McCarran, and there are studies that NDOT's doing for that intersection. It's my understanding that they're supposed to have a plan for it at some point here soon. My concern is that why are we moving forward with putting additional trips into that intersection when we know it's an issue and there's concern about, kind of intensifying that issue in the near term, when if we just wait a little bit, we might have a roundabout or a signal or something. So can you talk to me about the timing of this development relative to that study and potential improvements to that intersection?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And what I'd like to note is that when the planned unit development was being evaluated, the traffic study that was brought forward at that time really did take into consideration full build out at 745 units for Keystone Canyon. At that time, with the numbers that were provided, it didn't meet warrants for a traffic signal or any improvements at McCarran and Leadership. That is still the case today. With past applications that we've received, we have received updated information for the traffic numbers, and we don't have, this project will not result in a situation where it meets warrants for a traffic signal at the Keystone, Leadership, and McCarran Boulevard intersection. However, NDOT has heard concerns from the city of Reno and from residents within the area, and they are moving forward with a study that really does expand from the 395 McCarran to the east of this property, all the way down to the southwest to where kind of I-80 and McCarran are located. And they've taken into consideration kind of a broad spectrum of potential improvements along that corridor. With the Leadership and McCarran intersection specifically, they are aware that there is a desire and a potential need to do some improvements that allow for not only safer vehicle movements, but also for pedestrian crossings across McCarran. And so one of the alternatives that they had identified in their initial study is kind of a bigger pork chop type scenario where illegal left turns coming north from Keystone onto McCarran would be more difficult to maneuver. And then the second alternative, which seemed to be pretty popular at one of the workshops I went to when NDOT was presenting their alternatives, included the roundabout alternative. However, at this point, the study wasn't complete yet. I don't believe it's completed at this point yet. And funding would need to be identified for that through potentially state, federal, and possibly local funds. So at this time, there's not really a time frame for the improvements, nor have specific improvement alternatives been identified. But this project specifically doesn't meet warrants for a signalization of that intersection at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I could, one more question, unless there are other questions on similar theme there.
I think you were touching on questions I had, so please continue.
Okay. Heather, my next question is about wildland-urban interface and how this project addresses the potential threat for its location in the WUI. Does it incorporate any design features or components that address that potential threat?
And I may turn that over to the applicant to let them elaborate on what their design components may include to address that. I will say that this is within a pretty low minute, I think it was a couple of minute response time from the nearest fire station. And in addition to that, I do believe that their grading and landscaping has been designed to really take into consideration the location of the site. And I'll turn it over to the applicant to elaborate beyond that if they have a response.
Karen Downs, Manhard Consulting for the record. Heather covered the issues I would add. What I would add to that is that the wildland interface was included in the PUD handbook. There's conditions in there as well, so we'd comply with any conditions in the handbook as well as any staff conditions.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Additional questions? Commissioner Taylor?
Thank you. I have a question for Heather, please. And it might be a clarification again. I'm a little rusty. So there's a grading note under one of the conditions that reads, upon completion of the grading and prior to the application of revegetation, it's in bold. I won't go through it, but it says, they shall meet on site to determine the final grading and slope treatments. Is that for landscaping and aesthetics? My question is, why would, on completion of the grading, why would you meet out there to determine? Wouldn't you do it before? Maybe, again, I'm reading it wrong.
Sure, no problem. Thank you for the question. So that's a grading note that we do recommend when we have areas that are being disturbed, and it's not for the formal landscaped areas, it's for the areas that are disturbed but revegetated. And so we have that opportunity before they apply the revegetation material to visit with the applicant and determine the best method to utilize to make sure that that slope does get some revegetated material in a timely manner.
Okay, so I guess, just to clarify, you guys will meet out there prior to any grading?
So it's really the disturbed areas that are going to be revegetated, and so it really is upon completion of the disturbance of those areas that aren't going to be developed but will be revegetated.
Okay, thank you. Now I understand.
Sure,
Thanks.
you're welcome.
Additional questions, Commissioners? Commissioner Gower?
Mr. Chairman, I do have one quick question. Heather, in condition number 9, we have the construction hours from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Saturday. On the last item that we saw, the construction hours were 7 to 7, 6 days a week. Why is this one different?
When you say the last item that you heard, is it one that you heard this evening?
The last item was the Ryland, the one on Ryland.
That may have been something that Brooklyn, when he was writing the staff report, took into consideration, the location. This condition is pretty standard when we have development at a location that this project is located where there's residential surrounding the property.
Okay. Should have brought it up on that item too then. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Heather, before you sit down, just item 10, and I think maybe this is just a point of clarification with the requirement for a deed restriction on the open space. Is that being done because there's a change based on the limits in the PUD for what was multifamily and what was open space, and that shift? Is that the reason for this condition?
So this is a condition that has been consistent throughout the Keystone Canyon projects that have come before you. And there is that request. There's the flexibility provision within the PUD handbook that does allow for the applicant to kind of make adjustments to the open space areas. And while that's not going to be in the recorded PUD handbook, it is something that they've committed to retaining as open space. And so the method to do that would be through the deed restriction of those properties that don't necessarily have a land use identified in the PUD handbook as open space, but are intended to serve that purpose.
Okay. And then second question, you mentioned the email that we all had from the Trails folks, and I remember in reading that there were, I think, 3 items that they had in there as conditions that they're looking for, and I believe 2 of them were ones they were requesting, and it seemed to me that what's already included in the presentation aligned with those, but I guess my question is, is there a delta between what was discussed in that email regarding basically the trailhead development and the protection of the existing, or the cleaning up of the existing unauthorized uses? I think those were the 2 big ones. Have we adequately addressed that in the conditions that we've put on here and or the existing conditions that are there for the PUD?
I thought there was a condition that related to the trail improvements, but if you would like to either elaborate or add a new condition specifying more clearly the intent, we can add that this evening.
I know condition number 5 is the one that talks about the trail inventory plan and what's maintained and extended. I think that's the condition that we're looking at here. I believe what the applicant has presented in conformance with that is in agreement with what was commented on in the email. And I apologize for not having the email in front of me, but it seemed to me that condition that was here was essentially talking about what they were going to do, and it sounds like that, what they're proposing to do, is in concurrence with what was requested from the folks from the Trails Network.
That's my understanding as well, but I know the applicant had spoken with the gentleman who provided the letter, and so maybe they can provide some clarity on this situation. And the applicant did propose the overall trail plan, of which a lot of those kind of dirt roads exist today, and that condition and condition 1, which requires consistency with the proposal that's before you this evening, would ensure that those improvements and restoration elements get handled with development. But I can turn it over to the applicant to further clarify the intent of the letter.
Thank you. Karen Downs, Manhard Consulting. And yes, I should have mentioned that earlier. The communication with that trail stewardship group has been throughout the whole PUD process, including this project, Keystone Canyon, et cetera. They're in support of the project. Those 3 items you listed, I don't have the letter right here in front of me, but the 3 items that he included in that letter, the first 2 are included in the design of the project, and they're happy and in support of the project. The third one refers to water and sewer availability, and we've been working with them to see if there's anything that can work. I'm not sure that it can, but the applicant's willing to work with them and see what can work.
Okay. And I do remember in the letter, they were specific that they did not want to see that as a condition.
Right.
And I'm in agreement with that. So, okay, thank you for that clarification.
I'll add too that he's upset he couldn't be here tonight, but with the 4th of July holiday, he had other plans.
Apparently,
So
so did
he
some
sent
of
a letter.
us, so.
Yes.
Yeah, so,
So he did send that letter to make sure that you were aware of their support.
okay, thank you very much. Commissioners, additional questions? Commissioner Gower?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have another question. Karen, it's my understanding that I'm not sure which one, I believe it's I'm not sure which one it is in this PUD, but one of them has electric vehicle ready infrastructure. We've received a letter in our packet here, Exhibit C, from the Washoe County Air Quality Management Division, and a suggestion relative to addressing the region's ozone concerns. And one of those strategies is to incorporate EV infrastructure at residences to provide that option for vehicle charging. Would that be an option for your development?
Yes, it would be.
Okay.
I have a confirmation from the peanut gallery.
2 head shakes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioners. Additional questions? Commissioner Taylor?
Thank you. Exhibit A, just a clarification, maybe this is for you, Heather. All the conditions that were set for approval with the PUD and Exhibit A still stand with this approval, correct? So when we have conditions for NDOT, RTC, traffic, all of those still have to be met with this, correct?
Heather Manzo, Associate Planner, again for the record. Yes, that's absolutely correct. So not only the conditions recommended with the staff report, but also Exhibit A as it's attached to the report.
Thank you. Good clarification. Additional questions or discussion? Or a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to make a motion.
Commissioner Gower, nobody else is jumping up, so
Okay.
go right ahead.
The case of LDC 19-00067 Villas 2 at Keystone Canyon, based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve the tentative map and special use permits subject to the conditions, and I can make all of the findings.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Taylor, I second the motion. I can make all the findings.
Thank you, Commissioners, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Good luck with your project. Okay, next on the agenda, item number 7, Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Liaison Report.
Only thing I have to report is our next meeting is the 10th of July, and then they're looking at having another meeting on the 24th of August.
Okay,
That's all I have right now.
okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Next is item number 8, recommendation to City Council for appointment to the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Commission from the members of the Reno City Planning Commission to fill 2 vacant positions. So, trying to remember how we did this last time. Is this is a recommendation from commission to council for approval of those. So we're looking to fill 2 positions from everybody who is not Commissioner Gower, if I'm understanding that. Okay.
Had enough, huh?
No, Commissioner Gower is the position that's staying.
I'm
Is
the
that
only one
correct?
that's staying on there, apparently.
Okay.
We'll miss you, Ed.
Turn your microphone on, Ed. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to stay on if it's possible.
So I guess what we need is a motion for commissioners that we want to fill those positions that then goes up to council. So,
Mr. Chair, just so you know, everybody else who isn't appointed to the
Is
commission
an
will be
alternate.
alternate, yeah.
correct. So this is the 2 sitting members, and then in the case where one of the members can't attend, any one of the other commissioners is available as an alternate. Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Gower, do you have an interest in being on that?
Commissioner Gower, I would have an interest in being on it. I haven't been on it yet in the 4 years I've been here, so I would be interested in being on the regional commission.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion then to recommend Commissioner Johnson and Commissioner Hawkins to fill the 2 vacant seats.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Taylor, I second the motion.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Motion to council. I'm assuming that will be carried up by staff to the next
Yes, it
council
will.
meeting. Thank you, Arlo. Item number 9, staff announcements. Arlo, you're on. You've been quiet all night, so it's your turn.
It's a different seat here. A couple quick announcements. The city council hasn't met since your last meeting, so nothing from city council. I do want to report that the 2018 building and energy codes are now in effect and mandatory as of July 1. We got quite an influx of applications prior to that, so please bear with our staff if there's any slight sloppiness while we're clearing those out. Also, we're happy to announce we've initiated a pilot program for electronic permits. So people can submit for permits and receive their permits all electronically, no paper pushing necessary. This is initially in place for some limited permits, sign permits, residential, more of the easier ones, and we're planning to take that into full effect by the end of the year for all building permits. So that's a big step towards being more sustainable and not chopping so many trees, and also a customer service improvement that we're pretty excited about. It's been in process for quite some years. Also wanted to report we have Claudia's replacement. Her job position is posted, and that will close here in a week or so. So we hope to have a second planning manager on board relatively soon. And we also have an opening for a planning technician that should be filled within the next month or 2 as well. I think that's all I have for announcements.
Thank you, Arlo. Appreciate that. Next item, Commissioner suggestions for future agenda items. Any suggestions, Commissioners? Seeing none, I'll move on to item 11, public comment. This item is for a public comment on any action item or any general public comment. Is anyone in the audience wishing to make public comment under this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to commission for item number 12, adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Good night.
Good night.